I stood in my newly purchased dream home during my housewarming party, surrounded by friends and co-workers, celebrating my biggest achievement. The smell of fresh paint mixed with catered appetizers filled the air as laughter echoed through rooms I had worked 7 years to afford. Then my sister Brenda suddenly stormed through the front door with her 3 young daughters, announcing loudly that she was selling her house and moving her family into my home permanently. The entire party fell silent as our mother immediately supported Brenda's declaration, stating that my nieces needed the space more than a single woman. As guests began awkwardly clapping and Brenda started rearranging my furniture, I quietly retrieved a mysterious document from my purse. The champagne glass slipped from my hand as I watched Brenda march through my living room like she owned the place. Her twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both 8 years old, raced past my bewildered co-workers, while her youngest 6-year-old Grace started jumping on my new cream-colored sofa with her muddy sneakers. "Anna, sweetheart," my mother Margaret said, appearing at my elbow with that familiar smile that meant trouble. "Isn't this wonderful timing? Brenda really needs our family support right now." My colleague Sarah from accounting shot me a concerned look from across the room. She had helped me pick out the housewarming decorations just yesterday, hanging silver balloons that now seemed to mock the chaos unfolding beneath them. My neighbor Tom, who had brought homemade cookies, stood frozen by the kitchen island, clearly unsure whether to stay or flee. Brenda swept her long auburn hair over her shoulder and clapped her hands together. "Girls, go pick your bedrooms. Make sure you choose the ones with the best lighting for homework time." "Wait," what I managed to say, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. Margaret placed her hand on my arm, her grip firmer than necessary. "Your sister has been going through such a difficult time since the divorce, Anna. She needs somewhere stable for the girls while she gets back on her feet." The party guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. My friend Rachel, who had driven 2 hours from Portland to celebrate with me, looked like she wanted to disappear into the hardwood floors. Several people near the front door had already begun edging toward their coats. "Mom, we never discussed this," I said, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the awkward silence. Brenda turned from examining my entertainment center and laughed. "Of course we did. Mom told me you were excited to help your family. She said you felt guilty about buying such a big house when we needed somewhere to live." My stomach dropped. I had never said anything remotely like that to anyone. This beautiful 3-bedroom ranch house with its cathedral ceilings and updated kitchen was exactly what I had dreamed of since starting my career as a financial analyst. Every square foot represented overtime, hours, skipped vacations, and careful budgeting. "Actually, Brenda." I started, but she was already directing Emma toward the hallway that led to my home office. "That room will be perfect for Emma's art supplies," Brenda announced. "She needs somewhere quiet to practice piano, too. We'll have to move your desk somewhere else, Anna." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "See how excited the girls are. They've never had their own space before." I watched my guests becoming increasingly uncomfortable. My boss, Janet, who had graciously attended despite it being a Saturday evening, kept checking her watch. The catered sandwiches sat untouched on my dining room table as the festive atmosphere evaporated. "When exactly were you planning to move in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Next weekend," Brenda replied casually, testing the firmness of my recliner. "I already listed my house and we need to be out by the 15th. The girls are so excited they can barely sleep." Grace bounced on the sofa cushions, leaving dirt smudges on the fabric I had saved 3 months to afford. "Aunt Anna, can I paint my room purple? Mommy said you wouldn't mind since you love us so much." My throat tightened. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her mother had just ambushed her aunt at a party? How do you tell a room full of professional colleagues that your family was attempting a hostile takeover of your new home? "Mom, can I speak with you privately?" I asked. Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, honey, there's nothing to discuss privately. We're all family here. Besides, your guests should know how generous you're being." Sarah finally spoke up from her position near the kitchen. "Anna, we can finish celebrating another time if you need to handle family business." "No," Brenda said sharply. "This is perfect timing. Anna's friends should see how important family is to her. Right, Anna?" I felt trapped between the expectations pressing down on me and the growing embarrassment of my guests witnessing this spectacle. Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper, but was clearly audible to everyone. "Brenda really has nowhere else to go, sweetheart. She's been so brave through this divorce, but she needs her family now. You understand how much the girls need stability." The silence stretched uncomfortably. My friend David, who worked in real estate, looked particularly confused by the situation. He knew exactly how much effort goes into buying a home, especially for a single woman in today's market. Brenda walked back into the room carrying one of my throw pillows, which she placed on a different chair. "We should probably order pizza for dinner. The girls haven't eaten since lunch and moving makes everyone hungry." "Moving," I repeated. "Well, we brought our essentials today," Brenda said matter-of-factly. "The moving truck comes Monday for the furniture." I stared at her in disbelief. Through my living room window, I could see a white van parked in my driveway behind the cars of my guests. Suitcases and boxes were visible through the van's rear windows. Margaret noticed my expression and quickly jumped in. "Anna, you have 3 bedrooms and live alone. Brenda has 3 growing girls who need space for their belongings and school activities. It just makes sense." "But I never agreed to this," I said louder than I intended. The remaining guests fell completely silent. Emma and Sophie had wandered back into the living room and were now watching the adult conversation with wide eyes. Grace continued bouncing on my sofa, oblivious to the tension. "Of course you did," Margaret said firmly. "We talked about this weeks ago when Brenda first mentioned needing help. You said family comes first." I racked my brain trying to remember any such conversation. I had spoken with my mother about Brenda's divorce, expressing sympathy for what the girls were going through, but I had never ever suggested they move into my home. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Brenda pulled a key from her pocket and set it on my coffee table. "How do you have a key to my house?" I asked. Margaret looked sheepish. "I had a spare made when you gave me one for emergencies. I thought Brenda should have one too in case something happens and you need family nearby." My hands started shaking. This wasn't a spontaneous request for help. This was a coordinated plan. They had come to my housewarming party with keys, moving supplies, and a timeline already in place. They had orchestrated this public announcement knowing I would be too polite to refuse in front of my guests. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own family had ambushed me in my own home, counting on social pressure to force my compliance. I reached into my purse with trembling fingers, feeling for the folder I had brought to show my guests photos of the renovation process. But tucked behind those pictures was something else entirely, something I had discovered by accident just 2 days ago that changed everything I thought I knew about my sister's financial situation. "Actually, Brenda," I said, my voice steadying as I pulled out a stack of printed pages. "Before we discuss living arrangements, I'd like to talk about the house you're selling." Brenda's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "What about it?" I spread the papers across my coffee table right next to the key she had placed there so casually. The first page showed a rental listing from Craigslist, complete with photos of Brenda's house and a detailed description of available rooms. "According to this ad posted 3 weeks ago, you're renting out the master bedroom for $600 a month, the finished basement for $400, and the guest room for $500. That's $1,500 monthly in rental income." The room went dead silent. My guests leaned forward slightly, their discomfort now replaced by fascination with this unfolding family drama. Margaret's face drained of color as she stared at the printouts. "Anna, what are you doing?" Margaret whispered. I pulled out the next set of documents, bank deposit records I had obtained through a mutual friend who worked at Brenda's bank. These show consistent monthly deposits of $1,500 for the past 8 months. Every deposit is labeled as rental income in your account notes. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind her, Emma and Sophie had stopped exploring and were watching their mother with confusion. "Where did you get those?" Brenda demanded, snatching for the papers. I held them out of reach. The same place I found these. I produced a second batch of printouts showing online shopping receipts and vacation bookings. Spa weekend in Napa Valley, $1,500. Designer handbags from Nordstrom, $800. Disney cruise for you and the girls, $4,000. All paid for in the last 3 months while you were supposedly struggling financially. My colleague Sarah let out a small gasp. My neighbor Tom shook his head in amazement. Even Grace had stopped bouncing and was staring at the adults with the keen intuition children have for sensing when something important is happening. Margaret sank onto my love seat, looking genuinely shocked. "Brenda, is this true? You told me you could barely afford groceries." "Those deposits don't mean anything," Brenda said desperately. "The money goes straight to expenses for the girls. You know how expensive it is to raise children." I wasn't finished. The third stack of papers contained screenshots from Facebook and Instagram showing Brenda's recent posts. "Here you are at the Hilton Resort in San Diego 3 weeks ago. Designer cocktails by the pool professional manicure shopping at Beverly Hills boutiques. You posted about how you deserved this splurge after working so hard." The evidence was overwhelming. My guests sat in stunned silence as the truth unfolded. Brenda had been playing the struggling single mother card while living a lifestyle that many of my dual income friends couldn't afford. "Why would you lie to Mom about needing money?" I asked. "Why would you lie to me about being unable to afford your own house?" Brenda's face flushed red. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Those tenants are impossible to deal with. They complain about everything, they're messy. They have friends over at all hours. I'm tired of dealing with other people in my space." "So you decided to deal with my space instead," I shot back. Margaret looked between us with growing horror. "Brenda, I've been giving you $800 every month from my retirement savings because you told me you couldn't pay your mortgage." The number hit me like a slap. $800 a month for how long I looked at my mother's worn clothing, her careful way of declining restaurant invitations, her comments about needing to budget more carefully. She had been sacrificing her own financial security to help a daughter who was secretly earning more than many full-time workers. "Mom, how long have you been giving her money?" I asked gently. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. 2 years. 2 years. That was nearly $20,000 from my mother's fixed retirement income money she couldn't afford to lose and would never be able to replace. David, my real estate friend, couldn't contain himself anymore. "You've been running an illegal boarding house while collecting money from your mother under false pretenses. Do you realize the tax implications alone could land you in serious trouble?" Dimitz B. Brenda's defiance crumbled into panic. "It's not illegal. People rent out rooms all the time." "Not in residential neighborhoods without proper permits," David replied, "and definitely not while claiming poverty to obtain money from elderly relatives." The party guests were now completely absorbed in the confrontation. My boss, Janet, looked particularly interested, probably because financial fraud was something we dealt with professionally. My friend Rachel had pulled out her phone and was discreetly taking notes, her journalist instincts kicking in. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, standing up and facing Brenda directly. "I would have helped you if you had been honest. If you had said you needed a place to stay for a few weeks while transitioning between tenants, or if you wanted to sell your house and needed time to find something smaller, I would have considered it. But you lied to everyone, manipulated Mom's emotions, and tried to ambush me into giving up my home through social pressure." Grace finally spoke up in the small voice children use when they sense the adults are upset. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" Brenda's face crumpled as she realized her daughters were witnessing her deception being exposed. "Girls, go wait in the car." "Actually," I said firmly, "I think you should all go wait in the car. This party is over." Margaret stood up shakily. "Anna, honey, maybe we can work something out. Families should stick together during difficult times." "Mom, look at these numbers again," I said, handing her the bank statements. "Brenda is bringing in $2,300 a month just from rental income, not counting whatever part-time work she's doing. She's been lying to both of us for years." As the reality sank in, Margaret's shock turned to hurt, then to something I rarely saw from my gentle mother, anger. "Brenda Ann Morrison," she said, in the voice she used to use when we were children in serious trouble. "You told me you might lose the house. You said the girls needed new school clothes and you couldn't afford them. I've been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, so I could help you pay your bills." The image of my mother eating peanut butter sandwiches while Brenda posted photos of gourmet meals from expensive restaurants made my heart break and my temper flare simultaneously. Brenda grabbed Emma and Sophie by the hands. "You don't understand what it's like to be a single mother. Everyone judges you, everyone expects you to struggle. I was just trying to create security for my daughters." "By stealing from your own mother?" I asked incredulously. "It wasn't stealing," Brenda shouted, causing Grace to start crying. "It was family helping family." "Family helping family works both ways, Brenda. It means honesty, not manipulation." She stormed toward the door, pulling her confused daughters behind her. At the threshold, she turned back with venom in her voice. "This isn't over, Anna. These girls are your nieces. You can't just turn your back on family when we need you most. Don't expect me to forget how selfish you were today." The front door slammed behind them, leaving my mother and me standing in my living room, surrounded by my bewildered guests and the scattered evidence of Brenda's deception. The silence stretched for several moments before Janet, my boss, spoke up. "Anna, if you need any time off to deal with family issues, just let me know." After my guests left with awkward goodbyes and promises to celebrate properly another time, I found myself alone with Margaret in my disheveled living room. The catered food sat untouched, the decorative balloons seemed deflated, despite still being full of helium, and my beautiful housewarming party had become a crime scene of family betrayal. Margaret sat heavily on my sofa, staring at the financial documents scattered across my coffee table. Her hands shook as she picked up one of the bank statements, reading it for the third time, as if the numbers might change. "I can't believe I was so foolish," she murmured. $20,000 over 2 years. That's my entire emergency fund plus money I borrowed from my life insurance policy." My heart sank even further. "Mom, you borrowed against your life insurance to give Brenda money." She nodded, tears finally starting to fall. "She called me crying last Christmas, said she might lose the house if she couldn't catch up on mortgage payments. The bank was supposedly threatening foreclosure. I couldn't bear the thought of the girls being homeless during the holidays." I sat beside her, anger and sympathy warring in my chest. Margaret had raised Brenda and me alone after our father died in a construction accident when I was 12. She had worked double shifts at the hospital, gone without new clothes for years, and saved every penny to help us through college. The idea of her sacrificing her security for Brenda's lies made me feel physically sick. "Mom, why didn't you tell me Brenda was having financial problems? I would have helped her find legitimate solutions." Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "She made me promise not to tell you. Said she was too proud to let her successful younger sister know she was struggling. She said it would humiliate her if you knew she couldn't provide for her own children." The manipulation was even more sophisticated than I had realized. Brenda had isolated our mother, created artificial urgency, and used emotional blackmail to extract money, while simultaneously preventing Margaret from seeking advice or verification from me. "There's something else, Anna," Margaret said quietly. "Something I didn't want to admit in front of your friends." A chill ran down my spine. "What?" 3 weeks ago, Brenda came to my apartment with legal papers. She said since I was helping her so much with housing costs, it would make sense for me to be listed as a co-signer on some documents related to your house purchase. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What kind of documents?" She said they were just emergency contact forms in case something happened to you, and the family needed to access your property for safety reasons. She had them all filled out, said you had requested it, but forgot to mention it to me. My hands started shaking. "Mom, please tell me you didn't sign anything." Margaret's silence was answer enough. "What exactly did you sign?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Papers that listed Brenda as a beneficiary of your house if anything happened to you. Brenda said it was just a precaution that you wanted to make sure the girls would have somewhere to live if you were ever unable to care for yourself. I stared at her in horror. Mom, I never asked for anything like that. I never even mentioned involving Brenda in my property ownership. The full scope of Brenda's plan was becoming clear. She hadn't just been lying about her finances to extract money from our mother. She had been systematically positioning herself to claim ownership of my house through fraudulent documents. She said you were planning to tell me about it today at the housewarming party, Margaret continued. She said that's why she was so excited to move in. She thought you were giving her the house as a gift to help her start over after the divorce. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. Mom, I bought this house for myself. I saved for 7 years, got pre-approved for a mortgage based on my income alone, and put down 20% of my own money. Why would I give it away? Margaret looked confused and hurt. I don't know, sweetheart. Brenda was so convincing. She showed me text messages that she said were from you talking about how guilty you felt about having so much space when she and the girls were crowded in their old house. Can you show me those text messages? Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her conversations with Brenda. She showed me screenshots of messages that appeared to be from my phone number expressing concern about Brenda's living situation and suggesting she might want to move into my new house. But I had never sent any of those messages. Mom, these are fake. Look at the timestamps I was at work during several of these conversations. And look at the language. I don't write like this. The messages were full of phrases I never used, emotional appeals that didn't match my communication style, and references to conversations that had never happened. Someone had either spoofed my phone number or created fake screenshots designed to convince Margaret that I was orchestrating this entire plan. I've been so stupid, Margaret whispered. She played on my love for both of you girls and my fear of the family falling apart. After your father died, keeping our family together became the most important thing in my life. I couldn't bear the thought of Brenda and the girls suffering when I had the power to help. I put my arm around my mother's shoulders. You weren't stupid, Mom. You were loving. Brenda knew exactly which emotions to target because she knows how much you care about family. But now what do we do? Margaret asked. If she has legal documents that make her a beneficiary of your house, what does that mean? I honestly didn't know. Real estate law wasn't my area of expertise, and the implications of having documents filed without my knowledge or consent were terrifying. Could Brenda actually claim ownership of my house? Could she force me to sell it? Could she move in regardless of my objections? Mom, I need to see exactly what you signed. Do you have copies? Brenda said she would handle filing everything and would give me copies later. She said it was just a formality anyway, since you had already approved everything. Of course she did. Brenda had made sure Margaret had no documentation of what she had signed, preventing her from seeking independent advice or verification. We need to contact a lawyer immediately, I said, and we need to figure out how to prove those text messages are fake. Margaret nodded, but I could see the guilt and embarrassment weighing on her. She had been trying to help her family and instead had potentially enabled a sophisticated fraud against her other daughter. Anna, I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. Brenda seems so desperate and you're always so strong and capable. I thought you could handle anything while she needed protection. The irony was devastating. Margaret had been so focused on protecting Brenda that she had failed to protect me from Brenda's manipulation. But I couldn't be angry at my mother for loving her children, even when that love was exploited against her. Mom, we're going to figure this out together, but first I need you to promise me you won't give Brenda any more money no matter what story she tells you. I don't have any more money to give, Margaret admitted quietly. My savings account is empty and I've reached the limit on borrowing against my life insurance policy. If she asks for more help, I'll have to tell her I can't afford it. The situation was even worse than I had thought. Brenda hadn't just stolen $20,000 from our mother, she'd left Margaret financially vulnerable with no emergency fund and reduced life insurance coverage. At 72 years old, Margaret was now in a precarious position that could take years to recover from, if recovery was even possible, on her fixed income. I made a mental note to review my mother's entire financial situation and see what could be done to restore her security. But first I had to deal with whatever legal trap Brenda had set for me through those fraudulent documents. Looking at the evidence spread across my coffee table, I realized that Brenda's plan had been far more sophisticated than a simple request for temporary housing. She had been working for months to create a legal pathway to my property, while simultaneously draining our mother's resources to fund her own lifestyle. The question now was whether I could prove the fraud before she found a way to make her false claims stick. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed in my own house, but nothing felt secure anymore. The knowledge that Brenda had keys and potentially legal documents related to my property made every creak of the settling house sound ominous. I had barely slept running through worst-case scenarios and trying to figure out my next steps. My first call was to Jessica Chen, a friend from college who had gone to law school and now worked in real estate law. I needed someone I could trust to explain the legal implications of whatever Margaret had signed. "Anna, slow down," Jessica said after I rapid-fired the entire story at her. "First, take a breath. Second, we need to see the actual documents before we can assess any real threat to your property ownership." But what if Brenda filed something with the county recorder's office? What if she somehow put a claim on my house? Even if she did, fraudulent documents can be challenged. The key is proving they were filed without your knowledge or consent. Do you have any evidence that you didn't authorize these papers? I thought about the fake text messages and the forged conversations. I have evidence that she's been impersonating me electronically, and my mother can testify that I never asked her to sign anything. Good. But Anna, I think you need to do some more investigation before we take legal action. If Brenda is running rental operations and possibly committing fraud in multiple areas, we want to build a comprehensive case, rather than just reacting to individual incidents. Jessica was right. I needed to understand the full scope of what Brenda was doing before I could effectively fight back, and I had a terrible suspicion that the rental income and fake financial distress were just the beginning. After hanging up with Jessica, I decided to visit Brenda's neighborhood and see this supposed boarding house operation for myself. If she was illegally renting rooms in a residential area, there would be evidence visible to anyone who looked carefully. The drive to Brenda's house in Millfield took 25 minutes through suburban streets lined with modest single-family homes. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood where residents knew each other and paid attention to unusual activity. If Brenda was running a boarding house operation, her neighbors would definitely have noticed. I parked across the street from Brenda's two-story colonial and immediately saw signs of the rental operation. 5 different cars were parked in the driveway and along the street in front of the house. A handwritten sign taped to the front window advertised "Rooms available, clean, quiet, references required." As I watched a young man in work clothes emerge from the front door, got into one of the cars and drove away. 15 minutes later, a woman in scrubs came out of the same door suggesting multiple tenants with different work schedules. I walked up to the house next door and knocked. An elderly woman answered, looking suspicious, until I explained I was Brenda's sister. "Oh, honey, you need to talk some sense into that girl," the woman said, introducing herself as Mrs. Patterson. "I've got nothing against people trying to make a living, but this is a family neighborhood, not a hotel district." Mrs. Patterson invited me in for coffee and proceeded to detail months of problems caused by Brenda's rental operation. Excessive noise at all hours, cars parked illegally blocking fire hydrants, garbage overflow from too many residents, and a steady stream of strangers coming and going at all times of day and night. "I called the city planning office 2 months ago," Mrs. Patterson said. "This kind of boarding house operation requires special permits in residential zones. When I told them what was happening here, they said they'd investigate." "Have they done anything yet?" "They've been by several times taking photos and talking to neighbors. Last week, a code enforcement officer spent about an hour here documenting everything. He said they're building a case, but it takes time to go through proper legal channels." Mrs. Patterson showed me a notebook where she had been documenting disturbances and policy violations. She had dates, times, license plate numbers, and detailed descriptions of incidents that painted a picture of a residential property being used as an unlicensed commercial boarding facility. The worst part is the girls, Mrs. Patterson said sadly. Those 3 little ones are sweet as can be, but they're living in chaos. Strangers in and out of their house, constantly no stable routine, and their mother always stressed about managing all these tenants. It's no environment for children. A new piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Brenda wasn't just lying about her financial situation, she was potentially putting her own daughters in an unstable and possibly unsafe living situation for the sake of rental income. Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to share your documentation with me? I'm trying to help my mother understand what's really going on. Of course, dear. I can make copies of everything. But I should tell you there might be bigger problems than just the boarding house violations. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Last month, I overheard one of the tenants on his phone talking about how he was getting mail delivered here for welfare benefits, even though he was working full-time. And I've seen that same man paying your sister cash rent. If she's helping people commit benefit fraud while not reporting her rental income for taxes, that's federal crime territory. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Brenda was helping tenants defraud government assistance programs while evading taxes on her rental income, the legal consequences could be severe. And if she was facing serious criminal charges, her desperation to move into my house made perfect sense. She needed an escape plan. I spent another hour with Mrs. Patterson gathering evidence and contact information for other neighbors who had been affected by the boarding house operation. By the time I left, I had a clear picture of why Brenda was so eager to abandon her current living situation. She wasn't just tired of dealing with difficult tenants. She was trying to stay ahead of a city investigation that could result in heavy fines and possibly criminal charges. Moving into my house wasn't just about getting more space, it was about escaping the legal consequences of her illegal rental operation. But the most disturbing realization came as I drove home. If Brenda had been planning this escape for months, creating fake documents and manipulating family relationships to secure alternative housing, what else had she been planning? What other surprises might be waiting for me as I dug deeper into her activities? I called Jessica again from my car. We need to move faster than I thought. I think Brenda is in serious legal trouble and trying to use my house as a way to escape consequences for crimes she's already committed. Anna, if that's true, then she's potentially putting you at risk, too. If she moves into your house and authorities come looking for her, your property could be searched or even seized depending on what she's done. The thought of losing my dream home because of my sister's criminal activities was terrifying. But even worse was the realization that I might already be trapped in her web of lies through the documents Margaret had signed. I had to find out exactly what legal claims Brenda might have on my property, and I had to find out fast. Monday morning found me sitting in Jessica's downtown law office, clutching a manila folder containing everything I had gathered about Brenda's activities. The modern glass building felt reassuring after the chaos of the weekend, its clean lines and professional atmosphere a stark contrast to the family drama that had consumed my thoughts for the past 48 hours. Jessica reviewed the documents I had brought while I explained Mrs. Patterson's revelations about the boarding house operation and the city investigation. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she absorbed the full scope of the situation. "Anna, this is much more complex than I initially thought," she said, setting down the fake text message screenshots. "If your sister has been systematically planning this for months, we need to assume she's been thorough about covering her legal bases." "What do you mean?" Jessica pulled out her laptop and began typing. "Let me check the county recorder's office database to see if any documents have been filed against your property." The minutes ticked by as she searched through official records. I watched her face for any sign of what she was finding, my stomach churning with anxiety. "Oh no," she said softly. What did you find?" Jessica turned her screen toward me. 3 documents were filed 2 weeks ago, all naming Brenda Morrison as a legal beneficiary with rights to your property. There's an emergency contact authorization, a family property transfer agreement, and something called a hardship housing designation. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The documents looked official, complete, with notarized signatures and proper filing numbers. According to the records, I had voluntarily signed papers giving Brenda significant legal rights to my house. But I never signed any of these. How is this possible? The signatures appear to match your name, and they're properly notarized, Jessica said grimly. Either someone forged your signature very skillfully, or these documents were created using identity theft techniques. She printed copies of each document and spread them across her desk. The paperwork was sophisticated, using proper legal language and citing legitimate housing assistance statutes. To anyone reviewing them casually, they would appear completely legitimate. Jessica, what do these documents actually give Brenda the right to do? Worst case scenario, she could potentially force you to provide housing for her and her children under family hardship provisions. She could claim legal residency at your address. And if anything happened to you, she would have documented claim to inherit the property. The room felt like it was spinning. Can she actually force me to let her live in my house? These documents could give her a legal basis to try. But Anna, there's something else you need to know. I ran a background check on the notary who supposedly witnessed your signatures. Jessica pulled up another screen showing notary commission records. The notary listed on these documents had his commission revoked 6 months ago for participating in fraudulent document schemes. He's currently under federal investigation for identity theft and document fraud. A new level of fear settled over me. This wasn't just family drama or even simple fraud. This was organized criminal activity involving multiple people and sophisticated document forgery. So what does that mean for me? It means these documents are definitely fraudulent, which is good news for challenging them. But it also means your sister has been working with people who specialize in this kind of fraud, which suggests a level of criminal planning that goes far beyond what we initially suspected. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. Anna, I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way. Have you been under any kind of investigation lately? Has anyone from law enforcement or government agencies contacted you about your financial activities? No, nothing like that. Why would you ask? Because people don't usually go to these lengths to establish fraudulent property claims unless they're trying to hide assets from someone who's looking for them. If Brenda is facing serious legal trouble, she might be trying to move assets into your name to protect them from seizure. The implications were staggering. Not only was Brenda trying to steal my house, she might be trying to use me as an unwitting accomplice in hiding assets from law enforcement. Jessica, what should I do? How do I protect myself? First, we file emergency motions to have these fraudulent documents removed from the official record. Second, we document everything about how they were created without your knowledge. Third, we contact law enforcement about the identity theft and document fraud. She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. But Anna, there's something else to consider. If we move aggressively to expose Brenda's activities, she might escalate her efforts to claim your property. People who've invested this much time and effort into a criminal scheme don't usually give up easily when they're exposed. What do you think she might do? She could try to establish physical residency before we can get the documents overturned. She could claim you verbally agreed to let her live there and that the documents just formalize existing arrangements. She could even claim that you're the one committing fraud by denying agreements you supposedly made. The thought of Brenda turning the situation around and portraying me as the criminal was terrifying. She had already demonstrated sophisticated manipulation skills and access to people who could create convincing, fraudulent documents. How long will it take to get those documents removed from the official record? If we can prove fraud convincingly, probably 2 to 3 weeks for emergency motions. But that assumes Brenda doesn't file counterclaims or try to muddy the legal waters with additional false documents. Jessica stood up and walked to her window overlooking the city. Anna, I have to tell you something as both your attorney and your friend. This situation is more dangerous than typical family disputes. Your sister appears to be involved with organized document fraud, which often connects to larger criminal enterprises. You need to be very careful about your personal safety. You think she would hurt me? I think people who are desperate enough to commit multiple felonies to steal a house might be desperate enough to do other things if they feel cornered. And if she's working with professional criminals who specialize in identity theft, you're dealing with people whose ethics and methods are completely unknown. The conversation was taking on a surreal quality. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern was whether my housewarming party had been ruined. Now I was discussing personal safety and organized crime in connection with my own sister. What's my next step? Jessica returned to her desk and began gathering the documents. We start with filing police reports for identity theft and document fraud. Then we contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, since this appears to involve federal document fraud and possibly interstate criminal activity, and we get restraining orders to keep Brenda away from your property while we sort out the legal mess. Will that actually stop her if she's already committed multiple felonies? Restraining orders are just pieces of paper if someone chooses to ignore them, but they create legal consequences for violations and give law enforcement clear authority to arrest her if she continues harassing you. As we scheduled follow-up appointments and outlined the legal strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Brenda's plan had been too sophisticated, too well coordinated, and too precisely timed to be something she had conceived and executed alone. Someone had taught her how to create fake text messages, forge legal documents, and manipulate official recording systems. Someone had connected her with a corrupt notary and helped her navigate complex legal procedures. Someone with experience in these kinds of schemes had been guiding her efforts. The question was whether that someone was just a criminal associate she had hired, or whether this was part of a larger operation targeting multiple victims. And if it was a larger operation, how many other families might be dealing with similar fraud without realizing the full scope of what was happening to them? As I left Jessica's office with a thick folder of legal documents and a long list of next steps, I realized that my fight with Brenda was just beginning. She had invested too much time and effort into stealing my house to give up easily, and she apparently had criminal resources to help her continue the fight. But what worried me most was the thought of Margaret alone in her apartment, with depleted savings and no idea how deep Brenda's criminal activities might go. If Brenda was willing to commit federal crimes to steal from me, what other lies might she have told our mother? What other dangers might Margaret be facing without realizing it? I needed to find out exactly how far Brenda's criminal behavior extended, and I needed to find out fast. After leaving Jessica's office, I decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of Brenda's neighborhood. If she was involved in organized fraud, there might be evidence visible to someone who knew what to look for. I also wanted to speak with other neighbors who might have information about her activities. I drove back to Millfield and parked several blocks away from Brenda's house, then walked through the neighborhood as if I were out for casual exercise. The area was typical suburban residential with well-maintained houses and clear signs that residents took pride in their community, which made Brenda's boarding house operation even more obviously out of place. As I approached her street, I noticed something I had missed during my first visit. A small placard mounted on a utility pole advertised, "Furnished rooms, weekly rates, no deposits required." The sign included a phone number and the notation, "Ask for Brenda." Weekly rates without deposits suggested Brenda was catering to transient renters, possibly including people who couldn't qualify for traditional housing due to credit issues or lack of references. This type of arrangement often attracted individuals who might be willing to participate in questionable activities. I called the number from my cell phone, disguising my voice slightly. A recording answered with Brenda's voice. "You've reached Millfield Guest Houses. We offer clean, affordable rooms with flexible rental terms. Leave your name and needs, and I'll call you back with availability." Millfield Guest Houses, Brenda was marketing her illegal boarding operation as if it were a legitimate business, complete with a professional name and advertising. I continued my walk around the block and struck up conversations with several other neighbors. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than Mrs. Patterson had initially described. Mr. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down from Brenda, told me about frequent late-night deliveries to her house. Lots of packages and envelopes delivered at odd hours, he said. Sometimes people would come by at midnight or later to drop things off. My wife and I started wondering if something illegal was going on. Mrs. Thompson, whose backyard adjoined Brenda's property, had noticed multiple people using Brenda's address for mail delivery. The mailman told me he was delivering mail for at least 8 different names to that address, she said. That's way more people than could reasonably live in a single-family house. 8 different names receiving mail at Brenda's address suggested she wasn't just running a simple boarding house. She might be facilitating mail fraud, benefit fraud, or other schemes that required people to establish false residency. The most concerning information came from Mr. Davis, who worked night shifts and was often awake during late hours. I've seen people coming and going with computers and equipment, he said. One night I watched someone load what looked like hard drives and laptops into a van around 2 in the morning. When I mentioned it to my wife, she said maybe they were just moving electronics, but it seemed suspicious. Electronic equipment being moved at 2 in the morning sounded like either stolen goods or evidence being relocated. Combined with the other unusual activities neighbors had observed, it painted a picture of Brenda's house being used as a hub for multiple illegal operations. I walked past Brenda's house again, this time paying closer attention to details. Several windows had blackout curtains that prevented anyone from seeing inside. The yard was littered with cigarette butts and food containers suggesting high traffic volume. And I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a small security camera mounted under the eaves, positioned to monitor the street and anyone approaching the property. Brenda was conducting surveillance of her neighborhood, which suggested either extreme paranoia or awareness that her activities might attract unwanted attention from law enforcement. As I completed my circuit of the neighborhood, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop asking questions or you'll regret it. My hands started shaking as I read the message. Someone had been watching me during my neighborhood investigation and felt threatened enough by my inquiries to send a direct warning. I immediately called Jessica from my car. Someone just threatened me for investigating Brenda's activities. Anna, you need to get away from that area immediately, and we need to contact police right now. But I haven't found proof of anything specific yet. You've found evidence of organized criminal activity with surveillance and threat capabilities. That's enough to warrant immediate law enforcement involvement. Jessica was right. This had escalated beyond family disputes or even simple fraud. The threatening text message indicated I was dealing with people who were prepared to use intimidation and possibly violence to protect their operations. As I drove home, my mind raced through the implications of what I had discovered. Brenda wasn't just running an illegal boarding house. She appeared to be operating some kind of criminal hub that involved multiple illegal activities and potentially dangerous associates. The sophisticated document fraud targeting my property was probably just one component of a larger criminal enterprise. And if Brenda's associates were willing to threaten someone for asking questions in the neighborhood, they might be willing to escalate their tactics if legal pressure intensified. I called Margaret to warn her about the potential dangers, but her phone went straight to voicemail. A new wave of fear washed over me as I realized I hadn't spoken with my mother since Sunday evening. What if Brenda's associates had already approached her? What if they had identified Margaret as another potential target or threat? I changed course and drove directly to Margaret's apartment, my anxiety increasing with each mile. The threatening text message had transformed this situation from a legal problem into a potential safety crisis, and I had no idea how far Brenda's criminal associates might be willing to go to protect their operations. When I arrived at Margaret's building, I found her car parked in its usual spot, which provided some relief. But as I climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, I noticed her door was slightly ajar. Margaret never left her door open. She was careful about security, especially since she lived alone. I pushed the door open cautiously and called out, "Mom, are you okay?" Her apartment was ransacked. Furniture, overturned drawers, emptied onto the floor, papers scattered everywhere. And Margaret was nowhere to be seen. I called 911 from Margaret's destroyed apartment, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. While waiting for police to arrive, I searched through the chaos for any clue about what had happened to my mother or who had done this to her home. Most of her valuable items seemed untouched. Her television jewelry box and small electronics were still in place, but every piece of paper in the apartment had been pulled out and scattered. Someone had been looking for documents, not valuables. Officer Martinez arrived within 10 minutes along with a detective named Rodriguez. As I explained the situation, I realized how unbelievable the story sounded. Family drama involving property fraud had escalated to threats and now a possible kidnapping. "Ma'am, when did you last speak with your mother?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "Sunday evening after my sister left my house. We were supposed to meet for lunch today to discuss the legal situation, but she hasn't answered her phone." Officer Martinez was examining the apartment methodically. "It looks like someone was searching for specific documents. Did your mother keep important papers here?" "Yes, she had financial records, insurance policies, legal documents in a file cabinet in her bedroom. But I can't tell if anything specific is missing from all this mess." My phone rang Margaret's number. I answered immediately. "Anna." My mother's voice was shaky but alert. "Mom, where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm at Brenda's house. She came to my apartment this morning and said she needed to show me something important about the legal papers I signed. But Anna, something's very wrong here." Detective Rodriguez gestured for me to put the call on speaker. "Mom, your apartment has been ransacked. Did Brenda take you away before or after someone searched your place?" "After. She said she needed me to come with her to get the original documents I signed so we could clear up any confusion. But when we got here, there were strangers in her house, and they've been asking me questions about you and your property." My blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "They want to know about your bank accounts, your mortgage company, whether you have any other properties or investments. Anna, I think Brenda is in much more serious trouble than we realized." Detective Rodriguez took the phone. "Ma'am, this is Detective Rodriguez with the city police. Are you being held against your will?" There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice returned, more whispered now. "I don't know. Brenda says I'm here voluntarily, but every time I try to leave someone, tells me we need to finish our conversation first. Can you describe your location? Are you safe?" "I'm in Brenda's living room. There are 3 men here I don't recognize, and they seem very interested in documents related to Anna's house. They keep asking if Anna has told me about any other properties or bank accounts." Detective Rodriguez exchanged looks with Officer Martinez. "Ma'am, we're going to come get you right now. Can you stay on the line?" "I don't think so. Brenda is coming back into the room." The line went dead. Detective Rodriguez immediately called for backup and began coordinating a response to Brenda's address. I provided all the information I had gathered about the illegal boarding house operation and the criminal associates who might be present. "Miss Morrison, based on what you've told us and what we just heard on that phone call, this appears to be an organized criminal operation that's escalated to kidnapping and possibly extortion. We need to treat this as a high-priority situation." The next hour felt like the longest of my life. I sat in a police car outside Margaret's apartment building while officers coordinated with federal agents who had apparently been building their own case against Brenda's operations. Agent Williams from the FBI Financial Crimes Division explained that they had been investigating a document fraud ring that operated across multiple states. Brenda's name had appeared on their radar several months ago as part of a larger network that specialized in property fraud and identity theft. "We've been watching her activities, but we needed more evidence before making arrests," Agent Williams said. "The information you've provided fills in crucial gaps in our investigation." "What about my mother? Is she safe?" "We have surveillance teams positioned around the property. Your mother appears to be unharmed, but she's definitely being held by individuals we've been tracking for other federal crimes. The radio crackled with updates from teams at Brenda's house. Apparently, the situation was more complex than a simple boarding house operation. The property was being used as a headquarters for what law enforcement called a property theft ring that targeted families through document fraud and emotional manipulation. Your sister appears to have been recruited by this organization specifically because she had access to family members with valuable property, Agent Williams explained. They've been using her to gather information about your finances and property ownership as part of a larger scheme. The betrayal cut even deeper than I had imagined. Brenda hadn't just been lying about her financial situation, she'd been working with criminals to target our entire family for systematic theft. How long has this been going on? Based on our investigation, probably since her divorce began 18 months ago. Someone approached her when she was vulnerable and recruited her to participate in these schemes in exchange for money and protection. My phone buzzed with another text message, this time from Brenda's number. "Bring the property deed to my house alone or Mom gets hurt. You have 1 hour." Agent Williams read the message and immediately got on his radio. "All units, we have an active extortion threat. Prepare to move in immediately." "What about the deadline they gave me? What if they hurt my mother?" Miss Morrison, people who commit federal crimes don't usually hurt hostages when they know law enforcement is involved. It only increases their legal penalties. But people who are desperate enough to threaten elderly victims might make poor decisions. The radio chatter intensified as teams prepared to raid Brenda's property. I listened to law enforcement professionals discussing entry strategies, evidence preservation, and arrest procedures, while trying to process that my own sister was at the center of a federal criminal investigation. "Agent Williams, what's going to happen to Brenda? If she cooperates fully and provides information about the larger organization, she might be able to negotiate reduced charges. But she's looking at serious federal time for kidnapping, extortion, document fraud, and conspiracy charges." The reality of the situation settled over me like a weight. Even if Margaret and I emerged from this safely, our family would never be the same. Brenda had chosen criminal associates over family loyalty, and the consequences would reverberate through our lives for years to come. But first, we had to get Margaret home safely and see how much damage Brenda's criminal activities had caused to all of our lives. Agent Williams received word that surveillance teams had eyes on Margaret through the windows of Brenda's house. She appeared unharmed but was clearly being watched by at least 3 unknown men. The FBI had identified 2 of them as known associates of a document fraud ring that operated across 5 states. "Miss Morrison, we need you to follow our script exactly if they call again," Agent Williams said, handing me a prepared statement. "We want to draw out as much information as possible about their organization while keeping your mother safe." Before I could review the script thoroughly, my phone rang again. Brenda's voice was strained and desperate when I answered. "Anna, you need to listen carefully. This situation is bigger than I thought it would be. These people don't just want your house, they want access to your bank accounts, your credit, everything." "Brenda, let me talk to Mom. She's fine, but that might change if you don't cooperate. They know about your savings account, your retirement fund, even your work computer access. They've been planning this for months." A chill ran down my spine. How could strangers know details about my financial accounts and work access, unless someone with intimate knowledge of my life had been feeding them information for months? "How do they know about my personal finances, Brenda?" There was a long pause. "I might have mentioned some things when I thought this was just about getting help with housing. But it's gotten out of control, Anna. They want me to help them access your accounts electronically." Agent Williams was frantically taking notes and signaling other agents. Electronic access to financial accounts meant this criminal organization was far more sophisticated than simple document fraud. "What do you mean, access my accounts electronically?" "They have software that can transfer money if they have the right personal information and account numbers. They said it's just temporary, that they'll put the money back after they finish some business deal. But Anna, I don't think they're telling the truth about anything." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. This wasn't just about stealing my house anymore. It was about completely destroying my financial life through electronic theft. Brenda, you need to get Mom out of there right now. Tell them I'll cooperate, but only after she's safe. I can't. They won't let her leave until you bring the documents they want. And Anna, they want you to bring your work laptop too. They said something about accessing company financial systems. The full scope of the criminal plan became clear. They weren't just targeting me personally, they were trying to use my access to commit fraud against my employer. The financial damage could extend far beyond my individual accounts to potentially millions of dollars in corporate theft. Agent Williams took the phone. This is FBI Agent Williams. Who am I speaking with? The line went silent for several seconds, then a different voice came on male calm with no regional accent. Agent Williams, you're interfering with a family discussion about property arrangements. I suggest you back away before this becomes more complicated. Sir, you're currently committing federal felonies, including kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Release Mrs. Margaret Morrison immediately and surrender to federal agents. The man laughed. Agent Williams, Mrs. Morrison is here voluntarily helping her daughter resolve legal issues. No one is being held against their will. Then let me speak with Mrs. Morrison directly. She's resting right now, but I'm sure she'd want her other daughter to resolve these property questions as quickly as possible. It would be unfortunate if family stress caused health problems for an elderly woman. The subtle threat was clear. Agent Williams signaled to his team, and I could hear increased radio chatter as law enforcement prepared to move. Sir, what exactly do you want? We want Anna Morrison to bring the original property deed, all financial account information, and her work computer to this address within 45 minutes. Once we verify that the legal documents are properly executed, Mrs. Morrison will be free to go home. And if Miss Morrison doesn't comply, then Mrs. Morrison might need to stay here longer while we sort through these complicated family legal issues. Sometimes elderly people become confused and need extended assistance understanding important documents. Agent Williams ended the call and immediately began coordinating with tactical teams. They're using your mother as leverage to commit large-scale financial fraud. This is much bigger than property theft. What are they planning to do with my work computer? Based on the pattern we've seen with this organization, they probably want to access your company's financial systems to steal money or customer data. Your sister has been providing them with inside information about your job and computer access. The betrayal was complete. Brenda hadn't just targeted my personal assets, she had compromised my professional life and potentially put my employer and coworkers at risk. Agent Williams, I'll give them whatever they want if it gets my mother home safely. Miss Morrison, if we let them access your work computer, they could steal millions of dollars and destroy dozens of innocent people's financial lives. We can't allow that to happen. So, what's our alternative? Agent Williams consulted with tactical team leaders via radio. We go in fast and hard. Surveillance shows 3 suspects plus your sister and mother in the main living area. We have floor plans of the house from city records, and we know where everyone is positioned. What if they hurt my mother during the raid? Our hostage rescue teams are trained for exactly these situations. The risk to your mother is actually higher if we delay and let these criminals become more desperate. As law enforcement teams moved into position around Brenda's house, I realized this nightmare was about to reach its climax. Everything I had worked for my house, my career, my family relationships had been targeted for destruction by people who saw my life as nothing more than a source of money to steal. But the most devastating realization was that my own sister had been the insider who made it all possible. Brenda had traded away every bond of family loyalty for whatever promises these criminals had made to her. In 30 minutes, I would know whether Margaret and I would emerge from this with our lives and finances intact, or whether Brenda's criminal associates would succeed in destroying everything I had built. While FBI teams prepared for the raid on Brenda's house, Agent Williams asked me to help compile evidence that would be needed for prosecution. He explained that financial crimes cases require detailed documentation to prove intent and scope of criminal activities. Miss Morrison, we need you to walk us through every piece of evidence you've gathered. The timeline of events, the fraudulent documents, the fake communications. Everything will be crucial for building charges against the entire organization. We spread my evidence across a table in the FBI mobile command unit. The fake text messages, the fraudulent property, documents, the rental income records, and Mrs. Patterson's documentation of the boarding house operation created a comprehensive picture of systematic criminal activity. But as Agent Williams reviewed the materials, he made discoveries that shocked even me. These property documents weren't just forged, he said, examining the papers with a magnifying glass. They were created using stolen federal document templates. Look at these formatting codes in the margins. He pointed to tiny numbers and letters that I had never noticed. These codes indicate the documents were produced using software that's only available to government agencies and licensed legal professionals. Someone with access to federal document creation systems helped produce these forgeries. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a group of small-time criminals running property fraud schemes. It was an organization with connections inside government agencies or major legal institutions. Agent Williams continued his examination and made another disturbing discovery. The notary signatures on these documents match samples we have from previous cases in 3 different states. This same corrupt notary has been used by this organization for at least 18 months. He showed me files from previous investigations where the same notary signatures appeared on fraudulent documents used to steal property from other families. The criminal organization had been operating across multiple states, targeting families with valuable assets through systematic document fraud. How many other families has this happened to? We've documented at least 37 cases of property theft using similar methods. The organization appears to recruit family members who are in financial distress, then use them to gather information and create emotional pressure on the actual targets. The scope of victimization was horrifying. 37 families had been targeted for property theft through manipulation of vulnerable family members, and Brenda had been just one recruit in this systematic criminal enterprise. Agent Williams pulled out another file that made my blood run cold. Miss Morrison, I need to show you something else we discovered during our investigation. The file contained photographs and documents related to my employer's computer systems. Someone had been conducting detailed reconnaissance of my workplace, documenting security procedures, and identifying potential access points for electronic theft. They've been planning the corporate fraud component for at least 4 months, Agent Williams explained. Your sister provided them with your work schedule, security procedures, and details about your computer access. They knew exactly which systems they wanted to target. I stared at photographs of my office building, my desk, even my computer screen taken with a telephoto lens from a distance. Brenda had either provided these photos or helped someone else take them by giving detailed information about my workplace layout. Agent Williams, could they have already accessed my company's systems remotely? That's what we're trying to determine. We have cybersecurity experts analyzing your work computer and your company's network for signs of intrusion. If they gained access, the financial damage could be enormous. The radio crackled with updates from the tactical teams. They were in position and ready to execute the raid, but they wanted to wait for one more piece of information. Agent Williams, this is Team Leader Rodriguez. We need to know if the suspects have computer equipment in the house that they might try to destroy during the raid. Financial evidence could be lost if they have time to wipe hard drives. Agent Williams turned to me. Based on what neighbors told you about electronic equipment being moved in and out of the house, do you think they have significant computer operations inside? I thought about Mr. Davis's observations of people loading computers and hard drives into vans at night. Yes, I think they're running some kind of electronic operation from inside the house. Team Leader Rodriguez treat this as a cyber crime scene. Prevent destruction of electronic evidence at all costs. As final preparations for the raid continued, Agent Williams explained what would happen next. Once we arrest the suspects, we'll need you to review evidence and identify anything related to your personal information or property. We'll also need detailed statements about how your sister recruited you and gathered information about your finances. What's going to happen to Brenda? If she cooperates fully and provides information about the organization's other operations, she might be able to negotiate reduced charges. But she's facing serious federal time for her role in kidnapping, extortion, document fraud, and conspiracy to commit electronic theft. The radio erupted with activity as teams reported they were beginning their approach to the house. I listened to professional law enforcement officers coordinating a complex operation to rescue my mother and arrest criminals who had been systematically stealing from families across multiple states. All teams prepare to execute in 30 seconds. Priority is hostage safety. Secondary is evidence preservation. In less than a minute, I would know whether Margaret was safe and whether the criminal organization that had targeted our family would finally face justice. But I also knew that regardless of how successful the raid was, the emotional damage to our family would take years to heal. Brenda had chosen criminal associates over family loyalty, and that betrayal would haunt our relationships forever. Even if she cooperated with law enforcement and received reduced charges, the trust that held our family together had been shattered beyond repair. The countdown to the raid continued, and I held my breath, waiting to learn whether this nightmare would finally end with justice or escalate into even worse tragedy. Go, go, go! Agent Williams spoke into his radio as FBI tactical teams moved in on Brenda's house. Through the surveillance monitors in the command unit, I watched black-clad figures approach the building from multiple angles, while helicopters circled overhead. The raid lasted less than 4 minutes. Within moments of the teams entering the house, radio reports confirmed that Margaret was safe and 5 suspects were in custody without incident. The relief that washed over me was so intense, I nearly collapsed. "Hostage is secure and unharmed," came the report through the radio. "We've got 3 primary suspects plus the sister. Also recovered significant electronic evidence, including multiple computers and document production equipment." Agent Williams turned to me with the first smile I had seen from him all day. "Miss Morrison, your mother is safe. We'll have her brought here to the command unit, and then we'll need to process her statement about what happened." 20 minutes later, Margaret was sitting beside me in the FBI mobile command unit, shaken but physically unharmed. She held my hand tightly while describing her ordeal to Agent Williams and Detective Rodriguez. "They weren't violent, but they made it clear I couldn't leave," she said. "They kept asking about Anna's bank accounts, her work computer, even whether she had any safety deposit boxes or hidden assets. It was like they had studied our entire family's finances." "Mrs. Morrison, did your daughter Brenda participate in questioning you?" Agent Williams asked. Margaret's voice became sad and confused. "Brenda seemed scared of them too. She kept apologizing and saying this wasn't what she had planned, but she also kept urging me to call Anna and convince her to bring them what they wanted." "Did Brenda tell you how long she had been working with these people?" "She said it started about a year ago when someone approached her online after her divorce was finalized. They offered to help her make money through real estate investments, but it gradually became more complicated and demanding." Agent Williams showed Margaret photographs of the 3 men who had been arrested. She identified them as the people who had been questioning her, but she also revealed something that added another layer to the criminal conspiracy. The older man, the one who seemed to be in charge, kept talking on the phone about other families they were working with. He mentioned names and addresses in different cities. This wasn't just about our family. The scope of the criminal organization was becoming clearer. The FBI had broken up a multi-state operation that targeted dozens of families through recruitment of vulnerable relatives and systematic document fraud. Agent Williams received an update from the cyber crimes team that had examined the electronic equipment seized during the raid. The news was both relieving and terrifying. Miss Morrison, the good news is that they hadn't successfully accessed your work computer or your company's systems yet. The bad news is that they had detailed plans to do so, along with target lists for other employees at your company and similar businesses. He showed me printed files that contained personal information about my coworkers, their families, and their financial accounts. The criminal organization had been planning a massive coordinated attack on multiple companies through compromised employee access. Your sister provided them with organizational charts, security procedures, and personal information about dozens of your colleagues. If this operation had continued, the financial damage could have reached hundreds of millions of dollars. The betrayal extended far beyond my personal situation. Brenda had put every person I worked with at risk of financial devastation and identity theft. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we build the strongest possible case against everyone involved," Agent Williams replied. "Your sister is currently being questioned by federal agents. Her level of cooperation will determine how the prosecutor handles her charges." Detective Rodriguez returned from the arrest scene with updates about what had been found in Brenda's house. "We recovered over 50 fraudulent property documents targeting families in 12 states, computer equipment for creating fake identification documents, and financial records showing they had successfully stolen over $2 million from previous victims." $2 million stolen from families like mine. The number was staggering and heartbreaking. How many elderly parents had been manipulated? How many homes had been stolen? How many families had been destroyed by this criminal organization? "Detective Rodriguez, will the other victims be able to recover their losses?" I asked. "Some of the money has been recovered through seized accounts, but much of it was moved offshore or converted to untraceable assets. Unfortunately, many victims will never recover their full losses." The injustice of it made me furious. These criminals had targeted the most vulnerable relationships, family bonds, and elder care to steal from people who had worked their entire lives to build security for themselves and their children. Jessica arrived at the command unit to help me navigate the legal complexities of what would happen next. She had been coordinating with federal prosecutors and had updates about the civil legal actions needed to protect my property and finances. "Anna, the fraudulent documents filed against your property will be removed from official records within 48 hours, she said. "Federal prosecutors are fast-tracking the paperwork because of the criminal charges." "What about the damage to my credit or financial accounts?" "We've placed fraud alerts on all your accounts and credit files. Your bank is cooperating fully with law enforcement to identify any unauthorized access attempts. Your employer has also been notified and is conducting a comprehensive security review." Agent Williams interrupted our conversation with news about Brenda's cooperation with investigators. "Miss Morrison, your sister has agreed to provide full cooperation in exchange for a plea agreement. She's giving us information about other criminal operations and helping us identify additional victims." "What kind of plea agreement?" "Instead of potentially 15 to 20 years in federal prison, she'll probably serve 3 to 5 years and pay full restitution to victims. But that's contingent on her providing substantial assistance to law enforcement." 3 to 5 years seemed like a light sentence for someone who had facilitated the theft of millions of dollars and put dozens of families through traumatic experiences. But I also understood that her cooperation was necessary to catch the larger criminal organization and prevent future victims. "Will I have to testify at trials?" "Probably, but we'll make sure you have support throughout the process. Your testimony will be crucial for convicting the leaders of this organization and ensuring they receive maximum sentences." As the immediate crisis wound down, I began processing the full impact of what had happened. My sister had spent over a year working with criminals to systematically gather information for stealing my property and destroying my financial life. She had compromised my workplace, endangered my coworkers, and traumatized our elderly mother. The legal consequences would continue for months or years as trials proceeded and civil lawsuits were resolved. but the emotional consequences would last much longer. Margaret and I would need to rebuild our relationship and restore her financial security. I would need to repair my sense of safety and trust. And our family would need to figure out how to move forward knowing that one of our own had chosen criminal gain over family loyalty. But tonight Margaret was safe. The criminals were in custody, and the immediate threats had been neutralized. Tomorrow we could begin the long process of healing and rebuilding our lives. The next morning found Margaret and me sitting in my kitchen sharing coffee and trying to process the events of the previous day. She looked fragile and exhausted, but her spirit seemed intact despite everything she had been through. "Anna, I need to tell you something about yesterday," she said quietly. "Something I couldn't say in front of the FBI agents." My stomach tightened. "What happened, Mom?" When those men were questioning me, Brenda tried to defend me several times. She told them they were being too aggressive, that I was just an elderly woman who didn't understand complicated legal matters. I think she was genuinely trying to protect me. I wasn't sure how to respond. On one hand, I was glad Brenda had shown some concern for Margaret's welfare. On the other hand, she had created the dangerous situation in the first place. "Mom, did she say anything about why she got involved with these people?" Margaret nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She said after the divorce she felt like a failure, unable to provide for her girls, unable to maintain the lifestyle they were used to, ashamed to ask family for help. When someone offered her easy money for what seemed like harmless information gathering, she convinced herself it wasn't really criminal. But it escalated from there. She said once they had compromising information about her illegal rental operation and tax evasion, they used it to force her to participate in more serious crimes. She was trapped between going to prison for what she had already done or helping them with larger schemes. I could understand how someone in financial distress might make initial poor choices that spiraled out of control. But understanding didn't excuse the damage Brenda had caused to our family and others. My phone rang, Jessica calling with updates from her coordination with federal prosecutors. "Anna, I have good news and complicated news. The good news is that all fraudulent documents related to your property have been removed from official records. Your house and finances are completely secure." And the complicated news: Brenda's cooperation with federal prosecutors is revealing the scope of criminal activity extends much further than anyone initially realized. She's been providing information about corruption inside county recording offices, document fraud at multiple notary offices, and criminal networks operating in 8 states. The corruption was systematic and deeply entrenched. How many families had been victimized before law enforcement finally uncovered the full scope of the criminal organization? "Jessica, what does this mean for the legal proceedings?" "It means the trials will be lengthy and complex. Federal prosecutors are building cases against 23 individuals, including government employees who facilitated document fraud. Your testimony will be needed for multiple trials over the next 18 months. 18 months of legal proceedings meant 18 months of reliving this trauma and facing constant reminders of Brenda's betrayal. But it also meant ensuring that justice was served and future families were protected from similar crimes. Margaret had been listening to my conversation with growing concern. "Anna, what's going to happen to the girls? Emma, Sophie, and Grace didn't choose any of this." It was a question I had been dreading. With Brenda facing federal charges and possible imprisonment, her 3 daughters would need alternative care arrangements. As their aunt and Margaret's daughter, I might be expected to step in as their guardian. But how could I care for children whose mother had tried to destroy my life? How could I explain to them why their mother was in prison? How could I trust that Brenda wouldn't manipulate them to continue causing problems for our family? "Mom, I don't know if I can take responsibility for Brenda's children. Not after what she's done." Margaret's face fell. "They're innocent babies, Anna. This isn't their fault." "I know they're innocent, but I also know that caring for them would mean constant contact with Brenda, constant reminders of her betrayal, and possibly exposing myself to continued manipulation." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. I loved my nieces, but I also needed to protect myself and rebuild my sense of security. Taking on the responsibility of raising 3 children whose mother had traumatized me seemed like a recipe for continued chaos. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your sister wants to talk to you. Will you accept a call from Federal Detention Center?" I showed the message to Margaret. "Brenda wants to talk to me. Will you speak with her?" I honestly didn't know. Part of me wanted to hear her explanation and apology. Part of me never wanted to see or speak with her again. And part of me was curious about what she might say now that the criminal conspiracy had been exposed. "Mom, what do you think I should do?" "I think you should listen to what she has to say. Not because she deserves forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear the full truth about why she did this to our family." Margaret was probably right. For my own emotional healing, I needed to understand how Brenda had justified her actions and whether she felt genuine remorse for the damage she had caused. I texted back, "I'll accept one phone call." Within minutes, my phone rang with a call from the Federal Detention Center. Brenda's voice sounded small and defeated when I answered. "Anna, thank you for taking my call. I know you have every right to hang up on me." "What do you want, Brenda?" "I want to apologize for everything I put you and Mom through. I want to explain what happened, even though I know explanations don't excuse what I did." "I'm listening." After the divorce, I was drowning financially and emotionally. The girls were acting out I was behind on bills, and I felt like I was failing at everything. When someone contacted me online offering easy money for gathering information about successful family members, it seemed harmless. "When did you realize it wasn't harmless?" "Gradually. First they wanted basic information about your job and income. Then they wanted details about your property and bank accounts. By the time they were asking for copies of personal documents and asking me to manipulate Mom, I was too deep in to back out." "You could have told me what was happening. You could have asked for help." "I was ashamed, Anna. You had your life together while mine was falling apart. I was supposed to be the older sister protecting you, not the one creating problems. And by the time I realized how serious this was, they had evidence of my tax evasion and illegal rental operations. They threatened to turn me in if I didn't cooperate." The explanation made sense psychologically, but it didn't excuse the months of systematic lying and manipulation that had followed. "Brenda, what about Mom's money? What about traumatizing her yesterday?" "I know I can never make up for that. Taking Mom's retirement money was the worst thing I've ever done. And putting her in danger yesterday," her voice broke. "Anna, I hate myself for what I became." "What about your daughters? What's going to happen to them?" "I'm hoping Mom can care for them while I'm in prison. I know it's a lot to ask of her, but I can't bear the thought of them going into foster care." Margaret was 72 years old with depleted savings and no support system for raising 3 young children. The request was unrealistic and potentially harmful to both Margaret and the girls. "Brenda, Mom can't raise 3 children at her age, especially after you've destroyed her financial security." "I know. That's why I was hoping." "Anna, would you consider becoming their guardian? I know it's asking too much after what I've done, but they love you, and you're the only stable family they have left." The request hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Brenda was asking me to take responsibility for the children of someone who had tried to destroy my life, to sacrifice years of my own freedom and financial resources to clean up the consequences of her criminal choices. "I need time to think about it, Brenda." "I understand. Anna, whatever you decide about the girls, I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did to you and Mom." After ending the call, I sat with Margaret in silence, both of us overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decisions we faced. The criminal case was moving forward, but the personal consequences would define our family relationships for decades to come. Agent Williams called me early Tuesday morning with updates about the investigation that changed everything I thought I knew about Brenda's situation. Miss Morrison overnight questioning of the suspects has revealed that your sister was actually trying to extract herself from this criminal organization when the situation escalated yesterday. I was making coffee when he called and I nearly dropped the pot. What do you mean? The 3 men we arrested yesterday were not just criminal associates. They were holding your sister's children as leverage to ensure her continued cooperation. Emma, Sophie, and Grace were being kept at a separate location as insurance against Brenda backing out of the property theft scheme. My blood ran cold. Where are the girls now? They're safe. We recovered them yesterday evening from a house across town where they were being watched by 2 additional suspects who are now also in custody. The girls told child services workers they thought they were staying with friends of their mother while she handled business meetings. The full scope of Brenda's victimization became clear. She hadn't just been a willing participant in criminal activity, she'd been coerced through threats against her own children. Agent Williams, why didn't Brenda tell us her daughters were being held hostage? The suspects threatened to harm the children if she revealed their involvement to anyone, including law enforcement. She was told that cooperating with the property theft was the only way to keep her daughters safe. This information reframed everything about the previous day's events. Brenda's desperate insistence that I provide documents and computer access hadn't been motivated by greed or criminal loyalty. It had been motivated by terror for her children's safety. Where is Brenda now? She's still in federal custody, but her status is changing from primary suspect to cooperating victim. The prosecutor is reviewing her charges in light of the coercion evidence. Margaret had been listening to my conversation from the kitchen table. When I hung up, she looked both relieved and heartbroken. "Those poor babies," she said. "They've been traumatized by people who use them as weapons against their own mother." I called Jessica immediately to understand the legal implications of these revelations. If Brenda had been coerced rather than willingly participating, what did that mean for the criminal charges against her? Coercion is a legitimate defense for many crimes, but it doesn't excuse everything she did, Jessica explained. The prosecutor will need to determine which actions were taken under duress and which actions she took voluntarily before the coercion began. What about the money she took from Mom? What about the illegal rental operation? Those activities preceded the coercion, so she'll probably still face charges for tax evasion and elder abuse. But the property fraud charges might be dropped or significantly reduced. The legal situation was becoming more complex, but the emotional situation was becoming clearer. Brenda had made initial poor choices that put her in a vulnerable position, but the escalation to threatening my property and traumatizing Margaret had been driven by criminals who were holding her children hostage. Agent Williams called back within an hour with more updates that painted an even more disturbing picture of what Brenda and her daughters had endured. "Miss Morrison, we've been interviewing your nieces with child psychologists present. The girls have been living in fear for over 3 months, told that their safety depended on their mother cooperating with business associates who had rules that couldn't be broken. How are they handling everything?" "They're resilient, but they've clearly been traumatized. They've been taught to lie about their living situation, coached to support false stories about their mother's financial problems, and warned that police would separate them permanently if anyone asked too many questions." The children had been systematically manipulated and psychologically abused as tools for coercing their mother. The criminal organization had weaponized the parent-child relationship to ensure compliance with their theft schemes. What happens to the girls now? Child Services is evaluating options. Ideally, they'll be placed with family members while their mother's legal situation is resolved. The goal is to provide stability and therapeutic support to help them recover from this trauma. Margaret and I exchanged glances. We both knew that as the girls' closest relatives, we would be expected to provide the family placement that Child Services was seeking. Agent Williams, how long might it be before Brenda's legal situation is resolved? If she continues cooperating and the coercion evidence is verified through the investigation, she might be released to serve community service rather than prison time. But that process could take 6 months to a year. A year of caring for 3 traumatized children whose mother had been coerced into targeting my family. A year of helping them understand why their normal life had been destroyed by criminals. A year of rebuilding trust and relationships while navigating complex legal proceedings. The responsibility was overwhelming, but the alternative, letting Emma, Sophie, and Grace enter foster care, seemed worse. They had already been victimized by criminals who used them as weapons against their mother. Adding the trauma of separation from family would compound their psychological damage. My phone rang again, this time a social worker calling about immediate placement needs for the 3 girls. "Miss Morrison, I'm calling from Child Protective Services. We understand you're the girls' aunt and potential guardian. Would you be willing to meet with them today to discuss placement options?" The moment of decision had arrived faster than I had anticipated. I could provide temporary care while longer-term arrangements were made, or I could decline and let the state handle their placement. I looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. Despite everything we had been through, family still mattered, and these children were innocent victims who needed protection and stability. "Yes, I'll meet with them today." 2 hours later, I stood in a child services office waiting to see 3 little girls whose lives had been shattered by the same criminal organization that had tried to destroy mine. Emma, Sophie, and Grace had no idea that their aunt and grandmother were the targets their mother had been forced to betray. How do you explain to children that their mother hadn't chosen to hurt family, but had been terrorized into cooperation by people who threatened their safety? How do you help them understand that being placed with relatives wasn't punishment, but protection? The social worker opened the conference room door, and I saw 3 scared, confused little faces looking up at me with hope and uncertainty. "Girls," I said softly, "let's figure out how to take care of each other while your mom gets help with some very difficult problems." Emma, the oldest at 8, stepped forward first. "Aunt Anna, are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Some bad people created problems for your mom, and now we're going to keep you safe while the police take care of those bad people." The complexity of rebuilding our family relationships would unfold over months or years. But today, my job was simply to provide safety and comfort to 3 children who had been used as pawns in a criminal conspiracy. Tomorrow, we would begin the longer process of healing and creating a new normal for our fractured family. 3 weeks later, I sat in federal district court watching the conclusion of one of the most complex criminal cases the prosecutor's office had handled in years. 23 defendants faced charges ranging from document fraud to kidnapping, with evidence spanning 8 states and involving dozens of victim families. Brenda sat at the defense table, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her attorney had negotiated a plea agreement that recognized her status as both perpetrator and victim in the criminal conspiracy. Judge Martinez reviewed the sentencing recommendations as the courtroom remained silent. Margaret sat beside me, holding my hand tightly as we waited to learn Brenda's fate. "Miss Morrison," Judge Martinez addressed Brenda directly, "your cooperation with federal investigators has been instrumental in dismantling a criminal organization responsible for stealing millions of dollars from American families. However, your initial choices to commit tax evasion and elder abuse created the vulnerability that allowed criminals to exploit you and your family." Brenda stood to receive her sentence, tears streaming down her face. "Based on the cooperation agreement and evidence of coercion, this court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will pay full restitution to all identified victims, including the $20,000 fraudulently obtained from your mother." 2 years. It seemed like both too much and too little too much, considering the coercion she had endured. Too little considering the trauma inflicted on our family and dozens of others. But the sentence also included provisions for supervised visitation with her daughters and mandatory participation in financial counseling and psychological therapy. The court recognized that Brenda needed rehabilitation as much as punishment. Judge Martinez continued with sentencing for the other defendants. The 3 men who had held Margaret and threatened her daughters received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The corrupt notary who had facilitated document fraud across multiple states received 12 years. The government employees who had provided access to federal document systems received sentences between 8 and 15 years. Justice was being served for the criminal organization, but the personal healing for our family was just beginning. After the sentencing hearing, federal prosecutors briefed me on the broader impact of the investigation that had grown from my initial complaints about Brenda's activities. Ms. Morrison, your decision to investigate and report this criminal activity led to the recovery of over $4 million in stolen assets and the prevention of planned thefts targeting 60 additional families, Prosecutor Sarah Johnson explained. The numbers were staggering. 60 families who would never know how close they had come to losing their homes and financial security because one woman had refused to accept her sister's lies and manipulation. What happens to the other victims who lost money to this organization? A federal victim compensation fund has been established using recovered assets. Most families will receive partial restitution, though full recovery isn't possible in all cases. Your mother will receive complete restitution of the $20,000 plus interest and damages. Margaret would recover her lost retirement savings, but the emotional impact of Brenda's betrayal would take much longer to heal. Outside the courthouse, Jessica provided updates on the civil legal actions that had been necessary to protect my property and finances. Anna, all fraudulent documents have been permanently removed from official records. We've also obtained court orders prohibiting anyone from filing similar false claims against your property in the future. What about my work situation? Any lasting damage there? Your employer has been incredibly supportive throughout this process. They've enhanced security procedures and are actually using your case as a training example for employees about protecting personal information from family members who might be compromised. The professional consequences had been minimal, but the personal consequences continued to evolve daily as I adjusted to life as guardian of 3 young girls while their mother served her prison sentence. Emma, Sophie, and Grace had moved into my house 6 weeks earlier, transforming my quiet, single-person home into a bustling family environment. Margaret had also moved in temporarily to help with childcare, while we all adjusted to the new arrangements. The girls were receiving therapy to help process the trauma they had experienced, and slowly they were beginning to understand that their mother's actions had been motivated by fear for their safety, rather than deliberate cruelty to family. Aunt Anna, Emma had asked me the previous week, when Mom comes home from prison, will our family be normal again? It was a question I couldn't answer definitively. Normal would never be the same as it had been before, but we were creating a new version of normal that prioritized honesty, security, and emotional healing. Brenda would serve her sentence and then face years of rebuilding relationships with her daughters and our family. Margaret would recover her financial losses, but continued working to restore her sense of trust and safety. And I would continue learning how to balance my desire for independence with the responsibilities of caring for family members who needed protection and support. The legal resolution provided closure for the criminal case, but the personal resolution would require years of continued effort from all of us. That evening, as I helped the girls with homework at my dining room table while Margaret prepared dinner in my kitchen, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed by Brenda's choices and the criminal conspiracy that had targeted our family. My house had been saved, my finances were secure, and the criminals had been punished. But more importantly, 3 innocent children were safe and surrounded by family who would protect them while they healed from trauma that should never have been inflicted on them. The legal victory was satisfying, but the family healing was more meaningful than any court judgment could ever be. 6 months after the criminal trials concluded, I found myself sitting in a family therapy session with Margaret, Emma, Sophie, Grace, and via video conference from federal prison Brenda, Dr. Patricia Williams, a specialist in family trauma recovery, had been working with us to rebuild relationships damaged by crime and coercion. "Anna, how are you feeling about having direct communication with Brenda again?" Dr. Williams asked. I looked at the screen where my sister appeared in prison-issued clothing, looking healthier than she had in months, but still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "It's complicated," I admitted. "I understand that she was coerced and that her children were threatened, but I also can't forget the months of lies and manipulation that happened before the coercion began." Brenda's voice came through the speakers clearly. "Anna, I know I broke your trust long before those criminals threatened my daughters. The tax evasion, taking money from Mom under false pretenses, running the illegal rental operation. Those were choices I made because I was too proud to ask for legitimate help." Margaret spoke up from her chair beside me. "Brenda, I need you to understand how it felt to discover that you had been lying to me for years while I sacrificed my own security to help you. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could send you money you didn't actually need. Mom, I know I stole from you. I know I manipulated your love for me and the girls to get money I wasn't entitled to. That guilt is something I carry every day." Dr. Williams guided the conversation toward the progress that had been made over the past months. The girls had been thriving in my home, with Emma and Sophie excelling in their new school, and Grace overcoming the anxiety that had plagued her during the period when criminals were using her as leverage against her mother. "Girls, how do you feel about the conversations we've been having about what happened to your family?" Dr. Williams asked. Emma, now 9 years old and remarkably articulate, answered for her sisters. "We understand that Mom made mistakes, but that bad people made things much worse by threatening to hurt us. We love Mom, but we also love Aunt Anna and Grandma Margaret for keeping us safe." Sophie nodded agreement. "When Mom gets out of prison, we want our family to be together again, but we want everyone to tell the truth this time." 6-year-old Grace, who had been the most traumatized by the experience of being used as a hostage, had developed a mature understanding of the situation. "Bad people tried to break our family, but we're putting it back together in a new way." The children's resilience and wisdom continued to amaze me. Despite experiencing manipulation, coercion, and family separation, they had maintained their capacity for love and forgiveness while learning to value honesty and security. Brenda's voice cracked with emotion as she responded to her daughters. "I'm so proud of how strong and smart you girls are. When I come home, I want to earn your trust again by always telling the truth and making sure you're always safe." Dr. Williams shifted the conversation to practical planning for family reunification when Brenda was released from prison in 18 months. "Anna, you've been caring for the girls while maintaining your career and supporting Margaret's recovery. How sustainable is this arrangement long-term?" It was a question I had been wrestling with for months. Caring for 3 children had transformed every aspect of my life, from my daily schedule to my financial planning to my social relationships, but it had also brought unexpected joys and a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. "I want to continue being part of their daily lives even after Brenda is released," I said. "We've become a family unit that works well together, but I also want Brenda to be able to rebuild her relationship with her daughters without feeling like I'm interfering." Margaret had been quietly listening to our exchange, but now she spoke up with a suggestion that surprised everyone. "What if we formalized our new family structure? Anna has a big house with room for all of us. I can provide childcare and household support while Anna works. And when Brenda is released, she could live with us while she rebuilds her life and relationship with the girls." The proposal was both generous and practical. Margaret had found purpose and stability in helping care for her granddaughters. I had discovered that single-person independence was less fulfilling than family connection, and the girls thrived with the security of multiple adults who prioritized their welfare. "Mom, would you really want Brenda living in your house after everything she did to you?" I asked. "Anna, I've learned that holding on to anger hurts me more than it helps anything. Brenda made terrible choices, but she's also the mother of my granddaughters. If we can create a family structure that prioritizes the girl's welfare while allowing everyone to heal, that's what I want to do." Brenda was crying on the video screen. "I don't deserve that kind of generosity from either of you. But if you're willing to give me a chance to earn back your trust, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I've learned from my mistakes." Dr. Williams facilitated a discussion about boundaries, expectations, and accountability that would be necessary for such an arrangement to work. Brenda would need to demonstrate consistent honesty, undergo continued financial counseling, and submit to oversight of her decision-making until trust was rebuilt. But the framework for family healing was emerging. Instead of returning to the dysfunctional patterns that had made Brenda vulnerable to criminal manipulation, we were creating new relationships based on transparency, mutual support, and shared commitment to the children's welfare. As the therapy session concluded, Emma asked a question that captured the essence of what we were trying to build. Dr. Williams, when families get broken by bad things, can they become stronger when they fix themselves? Yes, Emma. Sometimes families that have been through difficulties together develop deeper trust and stronger bonds than families that have never faced challenges, but only if everyone commits to honesty, forgiveness, and putting the family's welfare above individual desires. Looking around the room at Margaret's determined face, the girl's hopeful expressions, and Brenda's tearful commitment to change, I realized that we were building something better than what we had lost. Our family had been targeted for destruction by criminals who weaponized our relationships against us. But we had survived the attack and were creating new bonds stronger than what had existed before. The healing process would continue for years, but the foundation for our rebuilt family was solid truth, accountability, forgiveness, and unconditional commitment to protecting each other. 1 year later, I stood in my backyard watching Emma, Sophie, and Grace play with the new swing set Margaret and I had installed for their birthdays. The sound of their laughter filled the space where I used to envision quiet evenings and solitary gardening projects. My life looked nothing like the independence-focused future I had planned when I bought this house, and I had never been happier. Brenda had been released from federal prison 2 months earlier and was living in the converted guest bedroom, working at a nonprofit organization that helped families affected by financial fraud. Her parole conditions required supervised employment and continued financial counseling, but she had embraced both requirements as opportunities to rebuild her integrity. "Anna, dinner's ready." Margaret called from the kitchen where she had been preparing her famous pot roast for our Sunday family meal. As we gathered around the dining room table that now accommodated 6 people instead of 1, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The criminal organization that had targeted our family had been completely dismantled. Federal investigations had expanded to uncover similar operations in 12 other states, leading to over 100 additional arrests and the recovery of stolen assets worth more than $50 million. My testimony at various trials had helped convict the leaders of the organization and establish legal precedents for prosecuting family-targeting financial fraud. The case had become a model for how law enforcement agencies identify and investigate these sophisticated criminal enterprises. But the legal victories, while satisfying, paled in comparison to the personal transformations that had occurred within our family. Margaret had recovered her financial security and discovered a renewed sense of purpose in helping raise her granddaughters. At 73, she was more active and engaged than she had been in years, volunteering at the girls' school and organizing community awareness events about elder financial fraud. Emma, Sophie, and Grace had not only recovered from their trauma, but had developed remarkable emotional intelligence and resilience. They understood the difference between mistakes and crimes, between accountability and punishment, between forgiveness and trust. And Brenda had transformed from someone who prioritized appearance over honesty into someone who valued transparency and family welfare above personal comfort. Her experience with criminal coercion had taught her that lies, even small ones, create vulnerabilities that can destroy everything you care about. Mom, tell us the story again about how you figured out the bad people were trying to steal our house. Sophie requested as we shared our meal. It had become a family tradition, not dwelling on the trauma, but celebrating the courage and intelligence that had protected our family from destruction. Well, I began settling into the familiar narrative. It started when I noticed that something didn't make sense about the story I was being told. When people you love ask you to make big decisions quickly without giving you time to think, that's a signal that something might be wrong. And you didn't get angry, you got curious, Emma added, having memorized her favorite part of the story. That's right. Instead of just reacting emotionally, I decided to investigate and gather facts. I learned that when something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, and you should trust your instincts while also verifying information. Grace, now 7 and remarkably wise, contributed her understanding of the lesson. And you learned that family means protecting each other, not lying to each other. Exactly. Real love doesn't ask people to sacrifice their security or safety. Real love wants everyone in the family to be safe and successful. Brenda had been quietly listening to our conversation, as she often did during these family storytelling sessions. Now she spoke up with the accountability that had become characteristic of her recovery process. Girls, I want you to remember that the bad people were only able to threaten our family because I made dishonest choices before they ever contacted me. If I had asked for help honestly when I was struggling, none of the scary things would have happened. But you learned from your mistakes. Mom, Emma said generously, and now you help other families learn how to ask for help the right way. Brenda's work with the nonprofit organization had evolved into a specialization in helping families recognize and resist financial manipulation schemes. Her personal experience as both perpetrator and victim gave her unique credibility in educating others about the warning signs of criminal targeting. As we finished dinner and the girls dispersed to their homework and play activities, Brenda and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen washing dishes. Anna, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again, she said quietly. Thank you for saving our family when I was destroying it. Thank you for protecting my daughters when I couldn't. And thank you for giving me a chance to earn back your trust. Brenda, we saved each other. Your cooperation with law enforcement helped convict criminals who would have continued targeting other families. Your honesty in recovery has helped our family heal. We're stronger together than we were apart. Sometimes I still can't believe you were willing to let me live here and be part of the girls' daily lives after what I put you through. I learned something important during this experience. Punishment doesn't heal families. Accountability and changed behavior heal families. You've taken responsibility for your choices and demonstrated consistent change in your decision-making. That's what matters now. As evening settled over our home, I stepped onto the front porch, where I used to envision quiet solitude, and instead found myself surrounded by the comfortable noise of a busy family household. 2 years ago, I had thought success meant independence and control over my environment. Now I understood that real security came from authentic relationships built on honesty, mutual support, and shared commitment to each other's welfare. The criminals who had targeted our family had believed they could exploit our emotional bonds to steal our assets. Instead, they had inadvertently strengthened our family by forcing us to choose between superficial harmony and genuine healing. We had chosen healing, and it had required courage from all of us. Margaret had found the courage to acknowledge that her desire to help had made her vulnerable to manipulation. Brenda had found the courage to accept accountability for her choices and rebuild her character from the foundation up. The girls had found the courage to trust adults again after being used as weapons in criminal schemes. And I had found the courage to prioritize family relationships over individual independence, discovering that protecting people you love is more fulfilling than protecting yourself alone. As I prepared for another week of managing my career while helping 3 children with homework, supporting my mother's volunteer activities, and encouraging my sister's continued recovery, I realized that this chaotic, demanding, love-filled life was exactly what I wanted. My house had been saved from theft, but more importantly, my family had been saved from permanent destruction. The document that had started this entire ordeal, the fraudulent property deed that Brenda's criminal associates had filed, was now framed in my home office as a reminder of what we had overcome together. But next to it hung something more meaningful, a family photo taken at Emma's graduation from elementary school, showing 5 women spanning 3 generations who had survived criminal targeting and emerged stronger than before. We had learned that family doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior, it means creating boundaries that protect everyone while maintaining space for growth, accountability, and forgiveness. Have you ever had to make difficult choices about family relationships when love and self-protection seem to conflict? How do you balance helping family members while protecting yourself from manipulation or harm? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more real-life stories about overcoming difficult family situations. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about how families can heal from betrayal and trauma, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to our family's journey from crisis to healing. Remember that even when people you love make harmful choices, it's possible to rebuild relationships based on honesty, accountability, and genuine care for each other's welfare. Sometimes the strongest families are the ones that have learned to choose love without sacrificing safety and forgiveness, without abandoning boundaries.